Hey guys, tonight we journey back to ancient Sparta, a place remembered for fearless warriors, brutal discipline, and one of the most demanding childhoods in human history. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in comfortably. Maybe dim the lights, grab a blanket, and allow yourself to drift slowly into tonight's journey through the distant past. And while you're relaxing, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these quiet explorations of history. Now, close your eyes for a moment and imagine a small child standing beneath the warm Greek sun nearly 2,500 years ago. He is only 7 years old. His family is nearby. His mother is watching. His father stands silently. Yet something unusual is happening. The child is preparing to leave home, not for a short visit, not for a seasonal journey, not even for a few months. He is leaving for most of his childhood. Today marks the beginning of a life that will belong more to Sparta than to his own family. Many people know Sparta because of legendary warriors and famous battles. Stories often celebrate courage, strength, and military achievement. But behind every Spartan soldier stood years of childhood experiences that modern people might find difficult to imagine. To understand Sparta, we must first understand what happened to the children. Ancient Sparta occupied a region known as Laconia in the southern part of Greece. Unlike many neighboring city-states that emphasized trade, art, philosophy, or political debate, Sparta organized much of society around military readiness. Generations of Spartans believed that their survival depended upon maintaining a powerful fighting force. This belief influenced nearly every aspect of life. The expectations placed upon adults were immense. The expectations placed upon children were even greater. A Spartan child entered a world where personal comfort rarely ranked as a priority. Strength mattered, obedience mattered, discipline mattered. The community often mattered more than individual desires. Modern historians continue to debate some details of Spartan life. Ancient writers occasionally exaggerated stories. Some accounts were written by outsiders. Others were produced centuries after certain events occurred. Yet despite these uncertainties, many sources agree that Spartan childhood differed dramatically from childhood in most societies. Life began much like anywhere else. Babies were born, families celebrated, parents hoped for healthy futures, mothers cared for infants, fathers watched children grow. The earliest years probably included affection, guidance, and family bonds. Spartans were not emotionless machines. They were human beings. They loved their children. They worried about them. They mourned losses. However, as children grew older, the priorities of Spartan society gradually became more visible. Young boys spent their earliest years within the household. During this period, mothers played particularly important roles. Interestingly, Spartan women enjoyed more independence than women in many other Greek communities. They could own property. They often received physical training. They managed estates when men were absent. Ancient visitors sometimes expressed surprise at the confidence and influence of Spartan women. For young boys, mothers became some of the first teachers. Lessons likely included stories, customs, values, and expectations. Children learned what it meant to belong to Sparta. They learned that courage was admired, cowardice was condemned, self-control was respected, complaining rarely earned sympathy. These ideas became woven into daily life long before formal training began. Imagine a 6-year-old boy running through dusty streets. The hills rise in the distance. Olive trees sway gently under the Mediterranean sun. Older youths pass nearby. Soldiers train in open spaces. Conversations about duty and honor drift through the air. Everywhere the child looks, he sees reminders of what society expects him to become. The future is already waiting, and that future arrives quickly. When a Spartan boy reached approximately 7 years of age, his life changed dramatically. This transition marked the beginning of participation in a system known today as the agoge. The agoge was not simply a school. It was an educational and training structure designed to shape future citizens and soldiers. For many boys, entering this system meant spending far less time with family. Daily life became increasingly organized around communal living, instruction, physical activity, and discipline. The separation could not have been easy. Imagine being 7 years old. Imagine leaving the familiar comfort of home. Imagine sleeping among groups of other children rather than beside family members. Even if everyone around you experienced the same transition, the emotional challenge remained real. Ancient accounts often focus on toughness. They discuss endurance and obedience. They rarely pause to describe loneliness. Yet loneliness surely existed. Children are children regardless of the century. A young boy might miss his mother. He might miss familiar meals. He might miss younger siblings. He might miss the simple certainty of home. The agoge sought to transform boys into disciplined members of society. Physical development formed one part of this process. Group identity formed another. Spartan authorities wanted individuals who could function effectively within larger units. Cooperation mattered. Reliability mattered. The needs of the community frequently took precedence over personal preferences. Daily routines reinforced these values. Boys spent substantial time together. They learned together. They trained together. They faced challenges together. Friendships emerged. Rivalries emerged as well. Every group of children develops social hierarchies. Ancient Sparta was no exception. Some boys naturally excelled. Others struggled. Some adapted quickly. Others found the demands difficult. The training environment could be harsh. Ancient writers describe efforts to cultivate resilience. Comforts remained limited. Children were expected to tolerate discomfort without excessive complaint. This expectation reflected broader Spartan ideals. Adults believed hardship prepared individuals for future challenges. Whether those methods were effective or unnecessarily severe remains a topic of debate. Modern perspectives on childhood differ greatly from Spartan assumptions, yet understanding Sparta requires viewing the world through Spartan eyes. They lived in a society that constantly worried about security. Military readiness seemed essential. Preparation began early because leaders believed survival depended upon it. As months passed, boys learned more than physical skills. They learned how to speak carefully. Ancient sources often describe Spartans as favoring concise speech. Brief, direct answers earned admiration. Long-winded explanations did not. A boy might spend years absorbing this communication style. Words carried weight. Silence often carried weight as well. Meals became another lesson. Food could be simple. Luxury was not the goal. Moderation was encouraged. Children learned to function with limited resources. Ancient stories even suggest that boys were expected to steal food under certain circumstances. The punishment supposedly focused less on stealing itself and more on getting caught. Historians debate how literally these stories should be interpreted. Yet the tales reveal something important. Spartans admired cleverness alongside endurance. Resourcefulness mattered. Finding solutions mattered. Avoiding detection mattered. Life rarely followed neat rules. Adaptability held value. As evening arrived, groups of boys gathered together. The day's activities ended. The sky darkened above Laconia. Stars appeared overhead. Conversations quieted. Exhaustion settled into tired muscles. Some children probably fell asleep immediately. Others may have stared into darkness. Perhaps they thought about home. Perhaps they wondered about the years ahead. Perhaps they simply drifted into dreams. The journey had only begun. The 7-year-old who entered the agoge would not emerge unchanged. Every season would shape him. Every challenge would leave a mark. Every lesson would gradually pull him farther from ordinary childhood experiences, familiar to most people throughout history. And as the months turned into years, Spartan training would become even more demanding. The expectations would increase. The freedoms would decrease. The tests would become harder. For now, however, the boys remained at the beginning of a long path. They were still learning the rules, still discovering their place among peers, still adjusting to a life defined by discipline rather than comfort. Ahead lay years of instruction, competition, hardship, and transformation. Years that would reveal why Spartan childhood became one of the most discussed and most disturbing systems of upbringing in the ancient world. And for one particular group of boys settling down beneath the night sky, the next morning would bring challenges unlike anything they had faced before. The next morning arrived long before the boys would have preferred. A faint gray light appeared over the hills surrounding Sparta. The air remained cool, carrying the lingering freshness that existed before the Mediterranean sun began warming the landscape. One by one, the boys stirred from sleep. There would be no leisurely morning, no opportunity to remain beneath blankets, no slow breakfast shared with family members. The routines of the agoge demanded movement. Almost immediately, the children entered another day structured around discipline and observation. One of the most important things to understand about Spartan childhood is that training did not occur only during designated lessons. The entire environment functioned as a lesson. How a boy walked could be noticed. How he spoke could be noticed. How he responded to discomfort could be noticed. How he interacted with others could be noticed. Supervision existed constantly. The adults responsible for the boys paid attention, not only to physical performance, but also to character. At least, character as Sparta defined it. A child who complained excessively might earn criticism. A child who appeared lazy could attract unwanted attention. A child who demonstrated determination might receive approval. Every day became a test, not necessarily a dramatic test. More often, it was a collection of small examinations occurring hour after hour. Imagine being 8 years old and knowing that many of the people around you are evaluating your behavior. The pressure would be difficult even for adults. For children, it must have been enormous. The boys spent much of their time together. This communal structure shaped nearly every aspect of life. Unlike modern childhoods, which often allow significant personal freedom, Spartan boys learned to think of themselves as members of a larger group. Individual identity mattered less than collective success. The lesson appeared repeatedly. The group trained together. The group ate together. The group endured hardships together. The group succeeded together. The group failed together. This constant emphasis on unity reflected Spartan priorities. Military formations depended upon cooperation. Battles could be won or lost based upon whether soldiers trusted one another. Leaders therefore sought to cultivate loyalty long before boys reached adulthood. Friendships formed naturally within these groups. Children laughed together. They shared stories. They competed against one another. They developed bonds that sometimes lasted for decades. Yet these friendships existed within a demanding environment. Competition remained unavoidable. Every boy wanted respect. Every boy wanted recognition. Every boy hoped to prove himself capable. Some excelled physically. Others struggled. Some possessed natural athletic ability. Others relied upon persistence and determination. The differences became increasingly visible as the years passed. Ancient sources suggest that physical training occupied a substantial portion of childhood. Running formed an important activity. So did jumping. So did wrestling. Strength mattered. Speed mattered. Coordination mattered. The body itself became an instrument that required constant development. Modern people often associate exercise with health, recreation, or personal goals. For Spartans, physical training carried broader significance. They viewed strong bodies as essential for the community's survival. Every exercise contributed to future military readiness. Every challenge represented preparation. The boys likely understood this from a very young age. What makes Spartan childhood particularly fascinating is that education did not focus exclusively upon physical development. Many outsiders assume Spartans ignored intellectual instruction entirely. The reality appears more complicated. Children learned reading and writing, though perhaps not with the same emphasis found elsewhere in Greece. More importantly, they absorbed social values. Stories conveyed lessons. Discussions conveyed lessons. Observing older youths conveyed lessons. The goal was not simply to create strong individuals. The goal was to create citizens who thought in ways that aligned with Spartan expectations. Throughout ancient Greece, many communities admired eloquent public speakers. Athens became especially famous for debate and philosophy. Sparta followed a different path. Spartans often valued brevity. A concise answer could earn admiration. A lengthy speech might attract criticism. This preference became so famous that even today the word laconic traces its origins to Laconia, the region where Sparta existed. Children learned to express ideas efficiently. A few carefully chosen words could carry more weight than a long explanation. As the boys grew older, discipline became increasingly strict. Older youths sometimes exercised authority over younger children. This structure reinforced hierarchy. It also created additional challenges. A younger boy needed to navigate relationships carefully. Respect became essential. Disobedience carried consequences. Ancient accounts describe punishments that modern audiences would likely consider severe. The exact details remain debated among historians. Ancient writers occasionally exaggerated foreign customs. Nevertheless, there appears to be broad agreement that Spartan discipline could be harsh. Adults believed hardship strengthened character. Children rarely received the level of protection modern societies often provide. Mistakes carried real consequences. The expectation was simple: learn quickly, adapt quickly, endure difficulties, move forward. The philosophy sounds straightforward. Living within it would have been much harder. One particular aspect of Spartan childhood has captured historians' attention for centuries. The boys often possessed very few clothes. Ancient accounts describe children wearing the same garment throughout much of the year. Whether every detail of these descriptions is accurate remains uncertain. Yet many scholars believe Spartan youths were intentionally exposed to discomfort. Cold weather arrived during winter months. Temperatures dropped. Rain occasionally swept across the landscape. Children still faced expectations regarding endurance. Modern parents frequently work to shield children from discomfort. Spartan society often moved in the opposite direction. They believed exposure to hardship created resilience. The boys also slept under conditions that many modern people would find unpleasant. Ancient writers describe children gathering reeds from riverbanks to create bedding. The process itself formed part of the lesson. Comfort was not provided automatically. Effort became necessary. Resourcefulness became necessary. Nothing was guaranteed. Every small challenge carried a message. Depend upon yourself. Depend upon your companions. Expect little. Adapt constantly. At first glance, these practices might seem unnecessarily difficult. Yet, from a Spartan perspective, they served a purpose. The city-state existed in a world where warfare occurred frequently. Communities could rise or fall unexpectedly. Preparation felt essential. Leaders believed future soldiers should become familiar with discomfort before encountering genuine danger. Whether they were correct remains open to debate. What cannot be denied is that children bore the burden of these beliefs. The most remarkable aspect is how young many of them were. Imagine a 9-year-old gathering reeds for bedding. Imagine enduring cold nights. Imagine spending years away from family. Imagine knowing that adults expected toughness rather than sympathy. Such experiences would shape any child, and they shaped Spartan children profoundly. Meanwhile, life beyond the agoge continued. Parents still existed. Families still cared. Mothers remained important figures within Spartan society. Many ancient sources emphasize the unusual status Spartan women enjoyed compared with women elsewhere in Greece. Girls received physical training. They participated in athletic activities. They often possessed greater freedom of movement. Visitors from other city-states sometimes found these customs surprising. Spartan leaders believed healthy women contributed to a stronger community. As a result, girls experienced childhood differently than many of their contemporaries across Greece. However, the famous military-focused system primarily centered upon boys. The separation between home and training remained one of its defining characteristics. A mother might occasionally see her son, yet she could not accompany him through daily routines. She could not remove difficulties from his path. She could not transform the system. The boy belonged increasingly to Sparta. This transition affected parents as well as children. Ancient literature occasionally preserves glimpses of Spartan attitudes toward courage and sacrifice. Some stories portray mothers encouraging bravery with remarkable determination. Whether every tale is historically accurate matters, less than what the stories reveal about cultural ideals. Sparta admired strength. Sparta admired endurance. Sparta admired service to the community. These values appeared repeatedly throughout childhood. Years passed gradually. The 7-year-old became 8. The 8-year-old became 9. The 9-year-old became 10. The changes occurred slowly enough that boys may not have noticed them day by day. Yet viewed across time, the transformation was extraordinary. Bodies became stronger. Voices deepened. Movements became more confident. Lessons accumulated. Habits formed. The carefree innocence associated with childhood elsewhere faded beneath increasing responsibility. By the age of 12, many Spartan boys faced a new stage of life. The expectations became even more demanding. The limited comforts they possessed would shrink further. The pressure would increase. The scrutiny would increase. The challenges would become far more intense than anything they had experienced during their earliest years in the agoge. For some boys, this transition marked the point where Spartan childhood became genuinely difficult, not merely unusual, not merely disciplined, but truly relentless. And as another year approached, the older children prepared to enter a phase of training that ancient writers remembered with a mixture of admiration, fascination, and unease. The hardest years were still ahead. The hardest years were still ahead. By the time a Spartan boy approached the age of 12, childhood, as most people understand it, had largely disappeared from his life. The transition was not marked by a grand ceremony. No dramatic announcement echoed across Sparta. No official declaration informed the boys that life was about to become more demanding. Instead, the changes arrived gradually, one expectation at a time, one challenge at a time, one hardship at a time. Yet when viewed from a distance, the difference was unmistakable. The 12-year-old standing in Sparta was living a very different existence from the 7-year-old who had first entered the agoge. His body had become stronger, his movements more controlled, his understanding of Spartan expectations far more developed. Most importantly, he had learned that comfort rarely occupied a place of importance within the world around him. Ancient sources describe this stage of training as particularly severe. Some accounts suggest that boys received only a single cloak each year. Whether every detail should be accepted literally remains uncertain. Ancient writers occasionally exaggerated Spartan customs to emphasize their uniqueness. Nevertheless, historians generally agree that Spartan youths were intentionally exposed to difficult conditions. The purpose remained consistent with broader Spartan ideals. Discomfort was not viewed as an enemy. Discomfort was viewed as a teacher. Cold weather became a lesson. Hunger became a lesson. Fatigue became a lesson. Even boredom could become a lesson. The boys were expected to endure, and endurance became a defining feature of daily life. Imagine a winter morning in ancient Sparta. The sky remains overcast. Moisture clings to the ground. A cold wind moves through the valleys. The boys rise before sunrise. Their clothing provides little protection. Their sleeping arrangements offer little luxury. Yet the day begins regardless. Training continues regardless. Expectations remain regardless. Modern people often think of Sparta as a place where children spent every waking moment exercising. The reality appears somewhat more complex. Physical training certainly occupied a central role. Running remained important. Wrestling remained important. Strength, balance, and endurance remained important. But Sparta also sought to cultivate mental resilience. The boys were expected to tolerate frustration. They were expected to remain calm under pressure. They were expected to obey instructions quickly. These skills mattered just as much as physical ability. A child who possessed strength but lacked self-control could create problems. A child who remained composed under difficult circumstances offered greater value to Spartan society. One interesting aspect of this period involved food. Ancient writers repeatedly mention that boys received limited rations. The exact reasons remain debated. Some historians believe the practice encouraged resourcefulness. Others argue it reflected broader ideas about discipline and moderation. Regardless of the explanation, many accounts suggest that hunger formed a regular part of life. Not starvation, not constant deprivation, but enough scarcity to create discomfort, enough scarcity to force adaptation, enough scarcity to remind boys that life would not always provide abundance. This environment encouraged creativity. It also encouraged risk. Stories circulated about boys stealing food. The famous tale appears again and again throughout ancient literature. According to these accounts, the problem was not necessarily the theft itself. The problem was getting caught. If a boy succeeded without detection, his cleverness might earn admiration. If he failed, punishment followed. Whether these stories perfectly reflect reality remains impossible to know. Yet they reveal something important about Spartan values. Success mattered. Skill mattered. Competence mattered. Excuses mattered very little. Among the most famous stories involves a young Spartan who supposedly hid a stolen fox beneath his cloak, rather than reveal the theft when questioned. He endured severe injuries caused by the animal. Eventually, according to the story, the injuries proved fatal. Modern readers often find the tale shocking. Historians debate whether it actually occurred. What matters is that ancient writers believed the story represented Spartan ideals: the willingness to endure pain, the refusal to reveal weakness, the prioritization of self-control. Whether true or legendary, the story illustrates the image Sparta wished to project. And for young boys growing up within that culture, such stories carried powerful messages. Every society tells stories about heroes. Sparta's heroes often endured suffering without complaint. As adolescence approached, competition intensified. The boys no longer resembled small children. Many had entered the awkward years between childhood and adulthood. Physical differences became increasingly noticeable. Some youths developed strength rapidly. Others matured more slowly. Natural talent began separating individuals from their peers. The training environment ensured these differences remained visible. Reputation became increasingly important. Respect among companions mattered. Approval from older youths mattered. Recognition from authority figures mattered. Success brought status. Failure could bring embarrassment. The pressure was constant, unlike a modern sporting event, where competition ends after a few hours. Spartan boys lived within a competitive environment every day. There was no clear separation between training and ordinary life. Life itself became the contest. This atmosphere undoubtedly shaped personalities. Some boys thrived, some struggled, some learned confidence, others developed anxiety. Ancient writers rarely discuss these emotional realities. They focused on ideals rather than feelings. Yet human nature has not changed as much as people sometimes imagine. A 12-year-old in ancient Sparta still experienced fear, still experienced doubt, still experienced loneliness, still experienced hope. The difference lay in how those emotions could be expressed. Open displays of vulnerability rarely aligned with Spartan expectations. As a result, many boys likely learned to conceal what they felt. One of the most fascinating aspects of the agoge involved observation. Older youths watched younger boys. Adults watched everyone. Behavior mattered. Character mattered. Small actions mattered. A moment of laziness could attract criticism. A moment of courage could attract admiration. The boys understood this. Consequently, they lived under nearly continuous evaluation. Imagine spending years knowing that your actions are constantly being judged. Imagine understanding that reputation follows you everywhere. Imagine realizing that every mistake may be remembered. Such conditions create a powerful incentive to conform. They also create enormous psychological pressure. Yet Sparta considered this pressure beneficial. The community wanted disciplined citizens. Discipline required practice. The boys practiced every day. Outside the training grounds, Sparta itself continued functioning. Farmers worked the land. Craftsmen produced goods. Families managed households. Religious ceremonies took place. Life moved forward. Yet underlying everything was a reality that shaped Spartan society more than almost any other factor. That reality involved a population known as the Helots. The Helots occupied a unique and deeply troubling position within Spartan society. They were not ordinary citizens. They were not free members of the community. Instead, they existed within a system of subjugation that allowed Spartan citizens to devote so much time to military training. For generations, helots cultivated farmland and performed labor that supported the Spartan state. They greatly outnumbered the Spartans themselves. This demographic imbalance created persistent anxiety. Spartan leaders feared rebellion. They feared unrest. They feared losing control. Many historians believe these fears influenced Spartan culture profoundly. Military readiness became essential not only because of external enemies, but also because of internal concerns. The boys growing up in Sparta may not have fully understood these complexities at first, yet they lived within a society shaped by them. The discipline, the vigilance, the constant preparation, all of it existed partly because Sparta believed danger could emerge unexpectedly. This atmosphere affected everyone, even children. As the years passed, the boys learned more about the world surrounding them. Their understanding deepened. Their responsibilities increased. The simple routines of childhood gave way to more serious expectations. By the age of 13 and 14, many youths found themselves approaching a critical threshold. They were no longer little boys, yet they were not fully grown men either. Sparta expected them to bridge that gap through increasingly demanding experiences. Some of the most controversial practices associated with Spartan adolescence were waiting just ahead, practices that would leave a lasting impression upon ancient observers, practices that continue to spark debate among historians thousands of years later. And as another year unfolded beneath the bright skies of Laconia, the boys prepared to enter a stage of life where survival, loyalty, and obedience would be tested more intensely than ever before. And as another year unfolded beneath the bright skies of Laconia, the boys prepared to enter a stage of life where survival, loyalty, and obedience would be tested more intensely than ever before. By the age of 14, many Spartan youths had spent nearly half their lives within the system of the agoge. The routines that once felt unfamiliar had become ordinary. The early homesickness that some may have experienced was now a distant memory. The rules were no longer something they consciously thought about. The rules had become part of them. They knew when to speak. They knew when to remain silent. They understood how to move through the social hierarchy that surrounded them. They understood which behaviors earned respect and which attracted criticism. Most importantly, they understood that adulthood was approaching. Yet adulthood in Sparta did not arrive suddenly. It emerged through years of preparation. Every season added another layer. Every challenge increased expectations. Every lesson reinforced the idea that personal desires mattered less than the needs of the community. the older boys began receiving responsibilities that younger children never experienced. They often served as examples for those entering the system behind them. New arrivals watched them closely. The way they carried themselves mattered. The way they handled difficulties mattered. The way they responded to authority mattered. Sparta expected older youths to embody the values the younger boys were still learning. This created a cycle that repeated generation after generation. The older boys had once been frightened newcomers themselves. Now they occupied positions that younger children viewed with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. In many ways, they had become part of the machinery that shaped Spartan childhood. Ancient sources describe a world in which relationships between age groups carried enormous importance. Older youths often supervised younger boys. Guidance could be offered. Correction could be offered. Encouragement could be offered. But so could discipline. The exact nature of these relationships remains a subject of historical discussion. Ancient writers did not always agree. Some accounts were written centuries apart. Others reflected the perspectives of outsiders. Nevertheless, it appears clear that mentorship and hierarchy played major roles in Spartan education. No boy developed in isolation. Every individual existed within a network of expectations. As adolescence progressed, physical contests became increasingly serious. Wrestling matches grew more competitive. Running competitions became more demanding. Displays of endurance attracted greater attention. A boy who excelled physically could earn admiration from peers and superiors alike. This recognition mattered. Status mattered in every human society. Sparta was no exception. The desire to prove oneself motivated many young men. Yet competition carried risks. Not everyone could emerge victorious. Not everyone could become the strongest. Not everyone could become the fastest. Failure became an unavoidable part of life. Learning how to respond to failure became another lesson. The Spartan ideal demanded persistence. A setback should not lead to surrender. A defeat should not destroy determination. The expectation was simple: rise and continue, again and again. Throughout these years, one characteristic increasingly distinguished Spartan childhood from childhood elsewhere in Greece: the amount of freedom granted to young people remained remarkably limited. In many communities, adolescents gradually gained opportunities to pursue individual interests. A merchant's son might learn trade. A craftsman's son might learn a specialized skill. A farmer's son might prepare to inherit family responsibilities. Spartan boys followed a much narrower path. Their education aimed toward a specific goal: producing disciplined citizens capable of serving the state. The result was a childhood unlike almost any other in the ancient Mediterranean. Many outsiders found it fascinating. Some found it admirable. Others found it deeply unsettling. One visitor might see remarkable dedication. Another might see the sacrifice of individuality. Both observations contained elements of truth. As the boys matured, they became increasingly aware of the wider world. Travelers occasionally arrived in Sparta. News arrived from neighboring regions. Conflicts emerged and disappeared. Political developments occurred across Greece. Yet Spartan youths often experienced these events indirectly. Their primary focus remained training. The wider world existed beyond their immediate concerns. This relative isolation contributed to Sparta's distinct identity. The city-state cultivated its own traditions, its own expectations, its own vision of what citizens should become. That vision demanded extraordinary commitment. Around this stage of life, many boys encountered one of the most famous and controversial rituals associated with Spartan society. Ancient writers describe a religious festival held at a sanctuary dedicated to a goddess known as Artemis Orthia. The event became famous throughout Greece. Visitors traveled considerable distances to witness it. Accounts differ regarding specific details, but many sources describe young Spartans participating in endurance contests involving physical punishment. Observers reportedly gathered to watch. Parents sometimes attended. The youths were expected to endure pain without breaking. To modern readers, these descriptions can seem shocking. Indeed, many historians debate the extent to which ancient authors exaggerated what they witnessed. Some writers enjoyed portraying Sparta as dramatically different from other societies. Exaggeration occasionally served literary purposes. Nevertheless, evidence suggests that public displays of endurance did occur. They became symbols of Spartan toughness. The stories spread widely. Over time, they helped create the legendary image of Sparta that survives even today. Imagine standing among a crowd watching such an event. The atmosphere would be tense. The spectators would remain focused. The young participants would understand exactly what was expected of them. The goal was not merely to withstand discomfort. The goal was to demonstrate mastery over oneself. Emotions must remain controlled. Fear must remain controlled. Pain must remain controlled, at least according to Spartan ideals. Reality was undoubtedly more complicated. Young people remained human. Regardless of training, they still experienced suffering. They still experienced anxiety. Yet the culture encouraged them to conceal these experiences whenever possible. This expectation followed them into nearly every aspect of life. As years passed, the distinction between childhood and military preparation became increasingly difficult to identify. The boys now looked more like young soldiers than children. Their days reflected that reality. Training intensified. Expectations intensified. Responsibilities intensified. Many ancient societies celebrated youth as a period of exploration and gradual development. Sparta viewed youth differently. Sparta viewed youth as preparation. Preparation for service. Preparation for sacrifice. Preparation for responsibilities that lay ahead. The philosophy shaped everything. One of the most important realities, often overlooked in popular depictions of Sparta, involves uncertainty. Modern portrayals frequently suggest that every Spartan youth developed into a confident warrior. History rarely works so neatly. Some boys undoubtedly flourished. Others probably struggled. Some possessed natural physical gifts. Others relied entirely upon determination. Some earned admiration. Others faded into the background. The ancient sources focus overwhelmingly on ideals rather than ordinary experiences. As a result, countless individual stories remain lost forever. Yet those forgotten stories matter. Among the thousands of boys who passed through the agoge over generations, each possessed unique fears, ambitions, friendships, and disappointments. Not every youth dreamed of military glory. Not every youth welcomed hardship. Some likely longed for simpler lives. Others may have embraced Spartan values wholeheartedly. Human diversity existed even within highly structured societies. No system could erase that reality completely. By the time many youths approached 15 or 16 years of age, they had entered one of the most challenging periods of their development. Physically, they stood between childhood and adulthood. Emotionally, they faced increasing pressure. Socially, expectations continued rising. The future seemed close enough to see, yet it remained frustratingly distant. Years of training still lay ahead. Years of evaluation still lay ahead. Years of proving themselves still lay ahead. And among the practices waiting in the coming years was one of the most mysterious institutions in Spartan history, a shadowy tradition that ancient writers described with a mixture of fear and fascination, a tradition known as the crypteia. Even today, historians continue debating exactly what it was, how it operated, and how deeply young Spartans became involved in it. For the adolescents moving through Sparta's demanding system, however, the rumors alone would have been enough to command attention, because the next stage of their journey would lead them far beyond the training grounds and into one of the darkest chapters of Spartan society, because the next stage of their journey would lead them far beyond the training grounds and into one of the darkest chapters of Spartan society. For centuries, the word crypteia has fascinated historians. Ancient writers mentioned it only briefly. The descriptions were often incomplete. Different authors provided different details. Some accounts were written long after Sparta's greatest period had passed. As a result, many questions remain unanswered. Yet despite the uncertainty, one thing appears clear. The crypteia occupied a special place within Spartan tradition, and for young men approaching adulthood, It represented something far more serious than ordinary training. The mystery begins with the name itself. The word is often translated as something similar to the hidden ones or the secret group. Even in ancient times, outsiders struggled to understand exactly how it functioned. Some writers described it as an advanced stage of education. Others portrayed it as a form of secret policing. Still others suggested it combined elements of both. Whatever its precise nature, the institution became closely associated with the darker realities underlying Spartan society. To understand why, we must return once again to the Helots. Throughout the fertile lands of Laconia and neighboring Messenia, Helots worked fields that supplied food to Sparta. They planted crops, they harvested grain, they tended vineyards, they performed labor essential to the functioning of the state. Without their work, the Spartan system would have faced enormous difficulties. Yet this dependence created a profound contradiction. Sparta relied heavily upon a population it did not fully trust, and that population greatly outnumbered the Spartan citizens themselves. Imagine living in a community where the people performing much of the labor outnumber you several times over. Imagine knowing that if those people ever united against you, the balance of power could change dramatically. This fear haunted Sparta for generations. Ancient sources repeatedly suggest that concerns about rebellion influenced political decisions, military policies, and educational practices. The fear never entirely disappeared. Every generation inherited it. Every generation adapted to it. And every generation passed it onward. For Spartan boys growing into young men, these realities gradually became impossible to ignore. As children, they focused on daily routines. As adolescents, they began understanding the larger system around them. They learned that Sparta's famous military culture did not exist in isolation. It existed partly because leaders believed constant vigilance was necessary. The world could be dangerous. External enemies existed. Internal threats, at least in Spartan eyes, existed as well. According to several ancient writers, the cryptea played a role within this environment. Descriptions vary considerably. Some accounts suggest selected youths were sent into the countryside with minimal supplies. They were expected to survive independently. They moved quietly. They observed carefully. They relied upon stealth rather than direct confrontation. The experience may have served as a test of self-reliance, a test of endurance, a test of resourcefulness for boys who had spent years within structured training. Such assignments would have represented a dramatic change. Suddenly, there were fewer companions, fewer supervisors, fewer routines. Instead, there was uncertainty. There was solitude. There was responsibility. Imagine a 16-year-old leaving the familiar rhythms of communal life. Imagine sleeping outdoors. Imagine navigating unfamiliar terrain after sunset. The countryside of southern Greece could be beautiful. Rolling hills stretched across the horizon. Olive groves dotted the landscape. Mountain ranges rose in the distance. During daylight, the scenery appeared peaceful. At night, however, everything changed. Darkness concealed landmarks. Strange sounds carried through the air. Wind moved through trees. Animals stirred beyond sight. The world felt larger and far less predictable. Many young people would find such experiences intimidating. That may have been precisely the point. Sparta valued confidence under pressure. Confidence could not be developed entirely through exercises performed within training grounds. Sometimes it required confronting uncertainty directly. The challenge forced young men to rely upon themselves. No parent could help. No childhood friend could solve problems for them. Every decision mattered. Every mistake mattered. Ancient authors also connect the crypteia to surveillance of the Helot population. Here, the historical record becomes especially troubling. Some sources describe selected youths monitoring Helot communities. A few accounts go even further, suggesting acts of violence intended to intimidate potential resistance. Historians continue debating how literally these reports should be interpreted. Ancient writers occasionally exaggerated. Political biases influenced many accounts, yet enough evidence exists to suggest that relations between Spartans and Helots could be harsh and oppressive. The possibility that adolescents participated in such a system reveals an uncomfortable truth. Spartan childhood was not solely about courage or discipline. It was also connected to maintaining an unequal social order. Popular culture often focuses on heroic images of Spartan warriors. The reality was more complicated. Every society possesses contradictions. Sparta possessed many. The same educational system that taught loyalty also reinforced domination. The same training that encouraged endurance also supported a system built upon coercion. Understanding these contradictions helps explain why historians continue studying Sparta so intensely. It was not simply a military state. It was a society filled with tensions. Tensions between freedom and control. Tensions between community and individuality. Tensions between admiration and fear. Young Spartans inherited all of these tensions. Whether they fully understood them is another question. Most adolescents focus primarily on immediate concerns, their next challenge, their next responsibility, their next opportunity to prove themselves. Ancient Spartan youths were probably no different. Even so, the lessons they absorbed during these years likely shaped their worldview permanently. As they matured, survival skills became increasingly important. The ability to endure hunger remained valuable. The ability to navigate difficult terrain remained valuable. The ability to remain alert during long periods of uncertainty remained valuable. Such skills could prove useful during military campaigns later in life. Spartan leaders understood this. Training always aimed toward future service. Nothing existed without purpose, at least in theory. Yet theory and reality often differ. A system designed by adults rarely feels the same to the children experiencing it. Ancient writers praised Spartan discipline. Many admired Spartan resilience. Few paused to consider what years of relentless pressure might feel like from a teenager's perspective. Imagine spending nearly a decade being evaluated constantly. Imagine living in an environment where weakness attracts criticism. Imagine knowing that your future status depends upon meeting expectations established long before your birth. The burden would be substantial. Some young men undoubtedly adapted successfully. Others may have struggled privately. The historical record rarely preserves those private struggles. History often remembers institutions. It often forgets emotions. Nevertheless, emotions existed. Fear existed. Doubt existed. Exhaustion existed. They always do. The remarkable thing about Sparta is not that these emotions disappeared. The remarkable thing is how strongly society encouraged people to hide them. As the years continued, many youths became increasingly invested in Spartan identity. The values they had learned since childhood now felt natural. The customs they once questioned now felt familiar. The discipline they once resisted now felt ordinary. This transformation represented one of the agoge's greatest achievements, or, depending upon one's perspective, one of its greatest costs. By shaping behavior so thoroughly, the system influenced how young men understood themselves. Their personal identity became deeply connected to the collective identity of Sparta. For leaders, this outcome represented success. For modern observers, it raises complicated questions. How much individuality should a society sacrifice in pursuit of unity? How much freedom should be surrendered in pursuit of security? Sparta answered these questions differently than most cultures. Its answers produced one of history's most unusual childhoods. And as the young men approached their late teenage years, the final stages of their transformation began to appear on the horizon. The years of preparation were nearing completion. The years of testing were nearing completion. Soon they would face a new challenge. Not as boys, not as trainees, but as young adults preparing to take their place within the citizen ranks of Sparta itself. Yet before they could reach that destination, they first had to survive the demanding transition from adolescence into manhood, a transition that would reveal whether years of hardship had truly achieved the goals Spartan society demanded. Yet before they could reach that destination, they first had to survive the demanding transition from adolescence into manhood, a transition that would reveal whether years of hardship had truly achieved the goals Spartan society demanded. By the time a Spartan youth reached his late teenage years, he had already experienced more discipline and structured training than many people would encounter in an entire lifetime. The frightened 7-year-old who once stood at the edge of the agoge now existed only as a memory. Years of routines had reshaped him. Years of expectations had shaped his habits. Years of observation had shaped his behavior. The transformation had not occurred overnight. It had happened gradually, almost invisibly, one day at a time. Now, standing on the threshold of adulthood, the young man faced, perhaps, the most important question of his life. Would he be accepted fully into Spartan society? The answer mattered enormously. For all the hardships of childhood, the ultimate goal remained participation in the community of Spartan citizens. Everything pointed toward that objective. The training, the discipline, the sacrifices, the endurance. Every challenge had prepared him for this moment. Yet acceptance was not automatic. Spartan society demanded proof. It demanded commitment. It demanded continued conformity to its values. The road toward full citizenship remained difficult. Many outsiders imagine that adulthood instantly granted freedom. In Sparta, adulthood often brought new responsibilities instead. The expectations changed shape, but they never disappeared. A young man approaching 20 years of age entered a world where military obligations became increasingly real. Training no longer represented preparation for future service. Training became service itself. The distinction between education and military life began to disappear. This stage marked an important turning point. Throughout childhood, boys had lived within a carefully controlled environment designed to teach specific lessons. As young adults, they entered a broader social world. However, even here, personal independence remained limited compared to many other Greek communities. Sparta continued emphasizing collective responsibility. The needs of the state remained paramount. One of the most important institutions awaiting these young men involved communal dining groups known as syssitia. Participation carried enormous significance. These groups functioned as much more than places to eat. They served social, political, and cultural roles. Members shared meals regularly. They developed bonds. They discussed matters affecting the community. They reinforced shared values. Acceptance into such groups represented a critical step toward integration within Spartan society. Yet gaining admission could be challenging. Existing members often evaluated candidates carefully. Approval required consensus. Rejection could have serious consequences. A young man might spend years preparing for a place that was never fully guaranteed. The pressure must have been immense. Imagine reaching the end of a difficult journey, only to discover that one final obstacle still stood before you. Everything depended upon how others viewed your character. how others judged your reputation, how others interpreted years of behavior. The stakes were extraordinarily high. For Spartan youths, social acceptance was not merely desirable, it was essential. Without it, full participation in the citizen body became difficult. And without that participation, many years of sacrifice could seem far less meaningful. As these young men entered adulthood, military training intensified further. Exercises became more realistic. Responsibilities increased. The possibility of actual warfare no longer seemed distant. Ancient Greece remained a world of rival city-states. Conflicts emerged regularly. Alliances shifted. Political circumstances changed. Sparta's leaders believed citizens must remain prepared. The lessons learned during childhood now revealed their intended purpose. Every cold night, every difficult exercise, every demand for self-control, every expectation of obedience, all had been designed to prepare individuals for adult responsibilities. Whether the system succeeded depended upon perspective. Certainly, Sparta produced soldiers renowned throughout Greece. Its military reputation became legendary. Even rivals acknowledged Spartan effectiveness. Yet military success represents only one measure of a society. Modern historians increasingly ask broader questions. What psychological costs accompanied such training? What opportunities disappeared because childhood followed such a narrow path? What talents remained undeveloped? What dreams remained unrealized? These questions cannot be answered fully. The ancient sources rarely preserve the voices of ordinary individuals. Most surviving accounts describe institutions rather than personal experiences. Even so, glimpses occasionally emerge. Small details, brief observations, fragments of human reality hidden beneath larger historical narratives. One such reality involved friendship. Despite the severity of Spartan upbringing, strong friendships undoubtedly developed. Children who trained together for years shared extraordinary experiences. They endured hardships together. They faced challenges together. They matured together. Such relationships often become incredibly powerful. Modern military veterans frequently describe similar bonds formed through shared adversity. The same phenomenon likely existed in Sparta. The young men standing beside one another had known each other for most of their lives. They understood one another's strengths. They understood one another's weaknesses. They shared memories stretching back to childhood. Those connections probably provided emotional support, even within a culture that discouraged open displays of vulnerability. Friendship may have helped many youths survive the pressures surrounding them. Without such bonds, the demands of Spartan life would have felt even heavier. Yet not every relationship remained positive. Competition persisted. Status remained important. Recognition remained important. Human societies rarely eliminate rivalry completely. Sparta certainly did not. Individuals continued seeking respect, continued seeking influence, continued seeking distinction. The desire to stand out coexisted with expectations regarding conformity. This tension existed throughout Spartan life. Citizens were expected to behave similarly, yet individuals still wanted achievement, still wanted admiration, still wanted success. Balancing those goals required careful navigation. The challenge followed many Spartans throughout adulthood. Meanwhile, another important aspect of life gradually emerged: marriage. Unlike many Greek communities, Spartan customs surrounding marriage possessed distinctive characteristics. Men often married later than elsewhere in Greece. Military obligations and communal living arrangements influenced these patterns. Women, meanwhile, generally married younger. Ancient writers frequently commented upon Spartan marriage practices, sometimes with fascination and sometimes with confusion. The details varied over time. Customs evolved, yet family formation remained an important part of adult life. Eventually, the boys who once left home at age 7 would establish households of their own. The cycle continued. New children would be born. New generations would grow. New boys would enter the agoge. The system reproduced itself decade after decade. This continuity contributed significantly to Sparta's stability. Yet stability came with costs. The same institutions that preserved tradition often resisted change. Throughout history, societies capable of adapting frequently outperform societies committed exclusively to preservation. Sparta eventually faced this challenge. For centuries, its educational system remained famous. Its military reputation remained formidable. Its customs remained distinctive. However, the Greek world around Sparta continued evolving. Trade expanded. Ideas spread. Political systems changed. New opportunities emerged. Sparta often responded cautiously, sometimes too cautiously. The very qualities that created strength occasionally created rigidity. The seeds of future difficulties already existed, even during periods of success. The young men completing their training could not see these future developments clearly. From their perspective, Sparta appeared powerful. Its traditions appeared enduring. Its institutions appeared permanent. History often creates such illusions. People living within a system rarely recognize how dramatically the future may differ from the present. For now, the focus remained immediate. Responsibilities awaited. Military service awaited. Adult citizenship awaited. The final years of preparation were drawing to a close, and as the young men moved toward full integration into Spartan society, they would soon discover whether the values taught since childhood could withstand the realities of adult life. Because learning discipline inside a training system was one thing, applying that discipline amid the uncertainties of the wider world was something entirely different. The true test of Spartan upbringing was about to begin. The true test of Spartan upbringing was about to begin. For nearly 13 years, the young men had lived within a world specifically designed to prepare them for adulthood. Every lesson pointed toward the future. Every challenge carried a purpose. Every hardship was justified as preparation for responsibilities yet to come. Now that future had arrived. The transition was not dramatic. No single sunrise transformed boys into men. No magical moment erased adolescence. Instead, adulthood emerged gradually. Much as childhood had disappeared, responsibilities accumulated, expectations increased, consequences became more significant. The young Spartans now occupied a position between youth and full maturity. They could participate more directly in military life. They could contribute more directly to the community. Yet they still had much to prove. Ancient Sparta often measured individuals not by what they claimed, but by what they demonstrated. Actions mattered more than promises. Performance mattered more than intentions. Reputation had to be earned continuously. One of the most striking aspects of Spartan adulthood involved the ongoing importance of communal living. Modern people frequently associate adulthood with independence. A person leaves home, establishes a household, creates a private life. Sparta followed a somewhat different path. Even after marriage, many men continued spending substantial time within military and communal structures. The individual remained closely tied to the collective. The bonds formed during childhood persisted. The dining groups remained important. Military obligations remained important. The community remained central. This arrangement reinforced many of the lessons learned during the agoge. The transition from childhood to adulthood therefore felt less abrupt than it might appear. The environment changed. Responsibilities changed. Yet the underlying values remained familiar. Loyalty, discipline, self-control, obedience, service. The young men had encountered these concepts throughout their lives. Now they were expected to embody them fully. For some, this likely felt natural. For others, perhaps less so. Human beings rarely fit perfectly into systems designed by societies. Every generation contains individuals who thrive within existing structures. Every generation contains individuals who struggle. Ancient Sparta undoubtedly included both. Yet the historical record overwhelmingly celebrates those who succeeded. The ordinary stories often disappeared. The doubts disappeared. The frustrations disappeared. The private disappointments disappeared. What remains are fragments. And from those fragments, historians attempt to reconstruct reality. Military service formed the foundation of adult male citizenship. Training continued. Exercises continued. Preparation continued. The difference now was that actual conflict could occur. Ancient Greece was not a peaceful place. Disputes between city-states emerged regularly. Territorial disagreements occurred. Political rivalries intensified. Alliances shifted unexpectedly. War remained a recurring feature of life. The Spartans prepared accordingly. For a young man raised within the agoge, the battlefield represented the ultimate examination. Everything learned during childhood could be tested there. Physical endurance, mental resilience, discipline under pressure, cooperation with companions. The qualities cultivated for years now possessed immediate practical value. Imagine standing in formation beside men you have known since childhood. You recognize their faces instantly. You trained beside them. You competed against them. You suffered alongside them. Now you face uncertainty together. The bond created through years of shared experiences becomes more than friendship. It becomes trust. Such trust formed one of Sparta's greatest strengths. Military effectiveness rarely depends solely upon weapons. It often depends upon cohesion, the ability of individuals to act together under difficult circumstances. Spartan leaders understood this. Much of childhood training aimed toward achieving exactly that outcome. Yet adulthood introduced complexities childhood could not fully prepare someone for. The world beyond the training grounds proved unpredictable. Real life always does. No educational system can anticipate every challenge. No institution can eliminate uncertainty. Even the most disciplined societies encounter unexpected problems. Sparta was no exception. One challenge involved balancing personal life with communal obligations. As men married and began families, new responsibilities emerged. A father now possessed duties extending beyond military service. A husband now possessed obligations extending beyond communal expectations. The priorities of family and state did not always align perfectly. Tensions inevitably emerged. Ancient sources rarely discuss these tensions openly, yet they must have existed. They exist in every society. Whenever individuals belong to multiple communities simultaneously, competing demands arise. Spartan men belonged to families. They belonged to military units. They belonged to dining groups. They belonged to the broader state. Managing these overlapping responsibilities required careful judgment. The lessons of childhood helped, but they could not solve every problem. Meanwhile, Spartan women continued playing important roles within society. Many outsiders commented upon their unusual level of influence compared with women elsewhere in Greece. They managed property. They supervised households. They often exercised considerable authority within domestic affairs. This arrangement partly reflected the military focus of Spartan life. Men frequently spent substantial time engaged in training or service. Women therefore assumed responsibilities that might be handled differently elsewhere. Ancient visitors sometimes expressed surprise at the confidence of Spartan women. Some admired it, others criticized it. The reactions varied, yet nearly everyone agreed that Sparta differed from other Greek communities. The distinction appeared in many aspects of life, including childhood, including adulthood, including family relationships. As years passed, the young men who once entered the agoge at age 7 gradually became respected members of society. Some earned distinction through military achievement. Some gained influence through leadership. Most likely lived ordinary lives, largely forgotten by history. This reality deserves emphasis. When people think about Sparta, they often imagine heroes, legendary warriors, famous commanders, celebrated victories. Yet most Spartans were ordinary human beings. They worried about families. They worried about harvests. They worried about health. They worried about the future. History tends to spotlight extraordinary individuals. The majority remain invisible. Nevertheless, the majority formed the foundation upon which societies rested. Without them, no state could function. Without them, no traditions could survive. Without them, no military reputation could exist. The ordinary Spartans mattered just as much as the famous ones. Perhaps more. As adulthood continued, another reality became increasingly apparent. The years of training had created strengths, but they had also created limitations. Sparta excelled in certain areas: military organization, discipline, collective action. These strengths were genuine. They helped explain Sparta's influence within Greece. Yet the intense focus upon military values sometimes came at the expense of flexibility. Other city-states encouraged broader intellectual exploration, broader commercial activity, broader cultural experimentation. Sparta often remained more cautious. The consequences unfolded gradually, not over years, over generations. The children entering the agoge today would inherit a somewhat different world than the one experienced by their fathers. The grandchildren would inherit a different world still. History never stands still. No matter how strongly a society attempts to preserve traditions, change eventually arrives. Sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. Sparta could delay change. It could resist change, but it could not prevent change forever. The young men, now reaching maturity, could not yet see these developments clearly. From their perspective, the institutions surrounding them appeared ancient and enduring. The agoge seemed permanent. The social structure seemed permanent. The values seemed permanent. Yet beneath the surface, forces were already reshaping the Greek world. Economic pressures, demographic changes, political transformations, all would eventually influence Sparta as well. For now, however, those future challenges remained distant. The immediate reality involved adulthood, responsibility, Service, family, community. The long journey that began at age 7 had achieved its purpose. The boys had become Spartan men, but an even larger question remained unanswered. What happened to Sparta itself? What became of the society that demanded so much from its children? And as the decades passed, that question would grow increasingly important, because the disturbing truth about Spartan childhood cannot be understood fully without understanding the fate of the civilization that created it. The story of the children and the story of Sparta were inseparable, and both stories were about to enter a new chapter. The story of the children and the story of Sparta were inseparable, and both stories were about to enter a new chapter. For generations, the Spartan system appeared remarkably successful. Visitors arrived from across the Greek world and saw disciplined citizens, organized military forces, and traditions that seemed ancient even by the standards of antiquity. Stories spread, admiration spread, fear spread. The name Sparta became associated with endurance, courage, and unwavering discipline. Parents in distant cities sometimes pointed to Spartan customs as examples of toughness. Philosophers debated Spartan institutions. Politicians studied Spartan government. Military leaders examined Spartan methods. Few Greek communities attracted so much attention, yet appearances can be deceiving. The same society that impressed outsiders also faced challenges hidden beneath the surface. Many of those challenges originated from the very system that had made Sparta famous. This is one of history's recurring patterns. A strength that creates success in one era can create difficulties in another. The qualities that allow a society to rise are not always the qualities that allow it to adapt. For a long time, Sparta's priorities aligned well with its circumstances. Military readiness offered advantages. Strict discipline created cohesion. Shared values encouraged unity. But history never remains frozen. The world changes. Conditions change. Problems change. And societies must change as well. One of the first major issues involved population. At its height, Sparta possessed a substantial citizen body capable of supporting its institutions. Yet over time, the number of full Spartan citizens began to decline. Historians continue debating the exact causes. Several factors likely contributed. Military losses reduced numbers. Economic inequalities increased. Property became concentrated among fewer families. Maintaining citizenship requirements grew more difficult. Gradually, the pool of citizens shrank. At first, the decline may have seemed manageable. A few fewer citizens did not necessarily create a crisis, but the trend continued. Year after year, generation after generation, the consequences accumulated slowly. This development carried enormous implications for Spartan childhood. The agoge existed to train future citizens. If the number of citizens decreased, the number of boys entering the system decreased as well. Fewer boys meant fewer future men. Fewer future men meant fewer soldiers. The cycle fed upon itself. A system designed to strengthen society now faced demographic pressures it struggled to solve. Imagine standing in Sparta and noticing that fewer children fill the training grounds than in previous generations. Imagine hearing older citizens discuss concerns about declining numbers. Imagine realizing that traditions once taken for granted now face uncertainty. Such changes rarely happen overnight. Most people living through them barely notice at first. The transformation appears gradual. Only later does the scale become obvious. Another challenge emerged from wealth. Sparta often promoted ideals of equality among citizens, at least in theory. Reality proved more complicated. Economic differences existed. Over time, those differences became increasingly significant. Some families accumulated considerable resources. Others struggled. Land ownership became concentrated. Opportunities became uneven. The ideal of a united community remained powerful, but maintaining that ideal became more difficult as economic realities shifted. Children growing up in Sparta inherited these changing conditions. The agoge still taught discipline. The agoge still taught obedience. The agoge still taught service. Yet the society surrounding those lessons was no longer exactly the same as before. The gap between ideals and reality widened. Such gaps often create tension. History provides countless examples. Sparta was no exception. Meanwhile, the wider Greek world continued evolving. Athens pursued commerce and culture. Other city-states experimented with different political systems. Trade networks expanded. Ideas traveled farther than ever before. New opportunities emerged beyond military achievement alone. Some communities embraced these developments enthusiastically. Sparta often approached them cautiously. Its leaders feared that excessive change might weaken traditional values. The concern was understandable. Traditions can disappear surprisingly quickly, yet resistance to change carries risks of its own. A society that refuses to adapt may find itself increasingly isolated. The balance between preservation and adaptation remains one of history's most difficult challenges. Sparta wrestled with that challenge for centuries. No simple solution existed. One generation valued stability. The next generation encountered new realities. The tension never disappeared. The children raised within the agoge experienced this tension indirectly. Their daily routines remained familiar. Their lessons remained familiar. Their expectations remained familiar. Yet the world awaiting them beyond childhood looked increasingly different from the world their ancestors had known. The contrast became more visible during periods of conflict. One of the most significant events in Spartan history occurred during the 5th century BCE. A long and devastating struggle erupted between Sparta and Athens. Modern historians call it the Peloponnesian War. The conflict lasted for decades. Entire generations lived beneath its shadow. Resources were consumed. Lives were lost. Political tensions intensified. The war reshaped Greece. For Spartan boys growing up during this period, military service no longer represented a distant possibility. It represented an approaching reality. The lessons learned during childhood suddenly acquired immediate relevance. Every drill, every exercise, every demand for endurance, all seemed connected to events unfolding around them. Eventually, Sparta emerged victorious. Its rival had been defeated. Its influence expanded. Many observers believed Sparta had reached the peak of its power. From a distance, the victory appeared magnificent. Yet victory often creates new challenges. Success can encourage complacency. Success can reveal hidden weaknesses. Success can generate responsibilities previously unimaginable. Sparta soon discovered this truth. Governing influence proved more difficult than achieving it. Maintaining power proved more difficult than gaining it. The years following victory brought opportunities, but also complications. New political pressures emerged. New rivals emerged. New expectations emerged. The disciplined military society that had conquered Athens now confronted problems that military discipline alone could not solve. This reality gradually exposed limitations within the Spartan system. The agoge excelled at producing obedient and resilient citizens. It did not necessarily excel at preparing leaders for every possible challenge. History rarely rewards specialization indefinitely. The qualities needed during one era may differ from those needed during another. As conditions changed, Sparta struggled to adapt. The consequences appeared slowly, then more quickly, and through it all, the children continued entering the agoge. 7-year-old boys still left their homes. They still endured hardships. They still learned obedience. They still prepared for futures increasingly uncertain. Imagine being one of those boys. You know nothing about demographic decline. You know nothing about economic pressures. You know nothing about geopolitical transformations. You simply follow the path generations before you followed. You trust the adults around you. You trust the traditions surrounding you. You trust that the sacrifices demanded of you serve an important purpose. Most children throughout history have done exactly the same. Yet history often judges societies differently than the people living within them. The adults believed they were preserving Sparta. The children believed they were preparing to serve Sparta. Neither group could fully see the future, and the future held surprises. Within the next century, Sparta would face one of the greatest shocks in its history, a shock so profound that many Greeks struggled to believe it had happened. For generations, the Spartan military had appeared nearly unbeatable. Its reputation seemed untouchable. Its warriors seemed invincible. Its educational system seemed validated by success. Then, suddenly, events unfolded that challenged assumptions held for centuries. The defeat would not merely affect armies. It would affect the entire meaning of Spartan childhood. Because once people began questioning Sparta's military supremacy, they inevitably began questioning the system that produced Spartan soldiers in the first place. And for the first time in generations, the famous agoge itself would face doubts about whether its sacrifices were truly worth the cost. And for the first time in generations, the famous agoge itself would face doubts about whether its sacrifices were truly worth the cost. For centuries, the reputation of Sparta had rested upon a simple belief. Spartan soldiers were the finest warriors in Greece. The idea became so widespread that many people accepted it without question. Children heard stories about Spartan courage. Adults repeated stories about Spartan discipline. Foreign visitors described Spartan customs with fascination. The image grew larger with every generation. Eventually, reputation itself became a source of power. Sometimes enemies feared Sparta before a battle even began. Fear can be a powerful weapon, yet reputation and reality are not always identical. A society can become famous for qualities that gradually weaken over time. The process often happens so slowly that few people notice. Then one day, an event occurs that makes the change impossible to ignore. For Sparta, that moment arrived in the 4th century BCE. The shock came from a city that many Greeks had long viewed as less formidable than Sparta. That city was Thebes. For much of Greek history, Thebes had lived in the shadow of larger rivals. Athens attracted attention. Sparta attracted attention. Thebes often received less notice. Yet beneath the surface, changes were occurring. New leaders emerged. New military ideas emerged. New ambitions emerged. While many people continued focusing on Sparta, Thebes quietly grew stronger. Most Spartans likely did not view this development as a serious threat at first. After all, generations had been raised believing in Spartan superiority. Their entire educational system reinforced confidence. Their entire culture reinforced confidence. Their entire history reinforced confidence. Questioning those assumptions would not have come naturally. Then came the year 371 BCE. A battle occurred near a village called Battle of Leuctra. At first glance, it appeared to be another conflict in the long history of Greek warfare. Yet its consequences would prove extraordinary. The Theban army, led by the brilliant commander Epaminondas, employed innovative tactics that challenged traditional expectations. What happened next stunned the Greek world. Sparta lost not merely a minor setback, not merely a temporary inconvenience, a genuine, undeniable defeat. The psychological impact was immense. For generations, many Greeks had viewed Spartan military success as almost inevitable. Now that belief lay shattered. News spread rapidly. Communities across Greece reacted with astonishment. People who had spent their lives hearing about Spartan invincibility suddenly faced a different reality. The mighty warrior state could be beaten. The implications reached far beyond the battlefield. Military defeats affect more than armies. They affect confidence. They affect identity. They affect the stories societies tell themselves. For Sparta, the defeat raised uncomfortable questions. If the agoge represented the ideal system of upbringing, why had Sparta lost? If decades of hardship created superior soldiers, why had another city-state prevailed? The answers were not simple. Military outcomes depend upon countless factors. Leadership matters. Strategy matters. Resources matter. Circumstances matter. No battle can prove the success or failure of an entire society. Yet public perception rarely operates according to careful historical analysis. People look for symbols. People look for meaning. The defeat at Leuctra became a symbol. It suggested that Sparta's long-held assumptions deserved reconsideration. For boys entering the agoge during these years, the world looked different from the world their grandfathers had known. The traditions remained. The lessons remained. The expectations remained. But certainty had begun to disappear. A shadow of doubt now accompanied the old confidence. The change was subtle at first, yet it mattered. After Leuctra, events moved quickly. The Thebans did not simply celebrate victory and return home. They took further action. For generations, Sparta had controlled neighboring regions through military power. Now those arrangements faced serious challenges. Areas previously dominated by Sparta began slipping beyond its control. Among the most important developments involved Messenia. For centuries, Messenia had supplied labor and agricultural resources through the Helot system. The relationship formed one of the foundations of Spartan society. Without that labor, the entire structure faced difficulties. After Sparta's defeat, opportunities emerged for dramatic change. The result transformed the balance of power. Many people previously held in subjugation gained freedom. For them, the events represented liberation. For Sparta, the events represented crisis. The consequences reached every level of society. Economic arrangements changed. Political influence changed. Military capabilities changed. The losses could not easily be reversed. Suddenly, Sparta confronted a reality it had long feared. Its dominance was no longer guaranteed. Imagine being a Spartan father during this period. Perhaps you endured the agoge as a child. Perhaps your father endured it before you. Perhaps your grandfather endured it before him. Generation after generation, the sacrifices seemed justified by success. Now success appeared less certain, would you still believe the hardships were necessary? Would you still believe every tradition deserved preservation? Would you still accept the costs imposed upon children? Different people likely answered differently. Some probably defended the old ways fiercely. Others may have questioned them privately. History rarely records those private conversations, yet they almost certainly occurred. Major defeats often provoke reflection. People begin asking questions they previously avoided. Sparta was no exception. Meanwhile, boys continued growing up within the agoge. They still woke before sunrise. They still endured difficult conditions. They still trained relentlessly. Yet the society preparing them for adulthood no longer possessed the same confidence it once enjoyed. The contrast became increasingly visible over time. Other Greek communities evolved. Economic opportunities expanded elsewhere. Intellectual life flourished elsewhere. Cultural developments accelerated elsewhere. Sparta often remained tied to traditions established centuries earlier. Traditions that once appeared revolutionary now appeared increasingly old-fashioned. This did not mean Sparta immediately collapsed. Far from it. Societies rarely disappear overnight. Institutions often persist long after their greatest successes. The agoge continued. Military training continued. Spartan identity continued. But the momentum had changed. Instead of expanding influence, Sparta increasingly struggled to preserve what remained. The distinction may seem small. In reality, it is enormous. A society focused on growth thinks differently than a society focused on survival. The concerns change. The priorities change. The outlook changes. Children growing up during these years inherited those changes, whether they realized it or not. One of the most fascinating aspects of history involves watching institutions outlive the circumstances that created them. The agoge had emerged in a particular historical environment. That environment no longer existed exactly as before, yet the institution remained. The question became increasingly obvious. Could the system adapt, or would it continue operating according to assumptions that no longer matched reality? The answer would shape Sparta's future, and perhaps more importantly for our story, it would shape the lives of countless children still passing through one of history's most demanding childhood experiences. As decades passed, the gap between legendary Sparta and actual Sparta grew wider. The legend remained powerful. The reality became more complicated. Visitors still arrived, expecting to witness the invincible warrior society of old. What they found increasingly resembled a civilization living in the shadow of its own reputation. The famous childhood training still existed. The famous discipline still existed. The famous customs still existed. Yet their purpose seemed less certain than before. And as the generations continued, a deeper question emerged, perhaps the most disturbing question of all. What if the sacrifices demanded from Spartan children had never truly guaranteed success in the first place? What if the harshness itself had been mistaken for strength? What if an entire society had asked extraordinary things from its young people without ever fully proving that the cost was justified? Those questions would linger over Sparta's final centuries, growing more difficult to ignore with every passing generation. Those questions would linger over Sparta's final centuries, growing more difficult to ignore with every passing generation, as Sparta moved further away from the age of its greatest victories. Something unusual began to happen. The legend continued growing even while the reality weakened. In many parts of Greece, people still spoke about Spartan courage. They still admired Spartan discipline. They still repeated stories about boys who endured hunger, cold, and hardship without complaint. The image remained powerful. Sometimes it seemed more powerful than ever. Yet inside Sparta itself, circumstances were becoming increasingly complicated. This is one of the strange patterns of history. A civilization can become famous for what it once was long after it has stopped being that thing. The reputation survives. The conditions that created the reputation do not. Children growing up in later Sparta inherited this contradiction. From the moment they entered the agoge, they heard stories about the achievements of earlier generations, stories about victories, stories about endurance, stories about citizens who supposedly embodied every Spartan ideal. The past surrounded them. The past inspired them. The past instructed them. But the present looked different, and the future would look different still. One challenge became increasingly difficult to ignore. The citizen population continued shrinking. This problem affected nearly every aspect of Spartan life. Fewer citizens meant fewer boys entering the educational system. Fewer boys meant fewer future soldiers. Fewer future soldiers meant reduced military strength. Every generation became smaller than the one before. The trend did not always move in a straight line. There were fluctuations. There were temporary improvements. Yet the overall pattern remained concerning. Imagine visiting Sparta centuries after its rise. The training grounds still exist. The traditions still exist. The ceremonies still exist. But there are fewer children than before, fewer young voices, fewer future citizens. The difference might seem subtle at first, yet over time, it becomes impossible to miss. Some ancient writers noticed these developments. They observed that Sparta appeared increasingly dependent upon a relatively small number of citizens. A society that once projected enormous confidence now faced demographic realities that confidence alone could not solve. The agoge could train boys. It could not create them. No amount of discipline could reverse a declining population. This fact exposed one of the limitations of the Spartan system. It excelled at shaping individuals who who already existed. It struggled when broader social conditions changed. Meanwhile, economic pressures continued reshaping society. Wealth became concentrated among fewer households. Land ownership became uneven. The ideal of a united citizen body persisted in speeches and traditions. Reality proved more complicated. Some families possessed significant resources. Others faced difficulties maintaining the obligations required of citizens. These differences influenced opportunities. They influenced status. They influenced the future. No educational system operates independently from economic conditions. The agoge was no exception. The boys entering training inherited not only Spartan traditions, but also Spartan problems. Another challenge emerged from outside Greece. For centuries, the Greek world had largely been dominated by rival city-states competing against one another. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth, many others. The political landscape remained fragmented. Then new powers began appearing beyond the traditional Greek framework. One of the most important came from the north. The kingdom of Macedon had often occupied a secondary role in Greek affairs. That situation changed dramatically under the leadership of Philip II. Philip transformed Macedon into a formidable military power. He reorganized armies. He introduced innovations. He exploited divisions among Greek city-states. Many communities underestimated him initially. That proved a mistake. As Macedonian influence expanded, traditional powers found themselves confronting a challenge unlike those they had faced before. Sparta was among them. The educational system that had prepared generations of Spartan boys for warfare now existed in a world increasingly shaped by larger political forces. The assumptions of earlier centuries no longer applied so easily. Military excellence remained valuable, but military excellence alone could not guarantee independence. History was changing. The pace of change was accelerating. Then came Philip's son, Alexander the Great. His campaigns transformed the ancient world. His armies traveled astonishing distances. His victories reshaped political realities across vast regions. Compared to these developments, Sparta appeared increasingly isolated. The city-state still existed. Its traditions still survived, yet it no longer occupied the center of Greek affairs. The contrast would have been striking to anyone familiar with earlier generations. The children enduring hardship within the agoge were preparing for a society whose influence continued diminishing. The sacrifices remained. The rewards became less certain. And this brings us closer to one of the most disturbing truths about Spartan childhood. The adults who designed the system genuinely believed they were protecting Sparta. They believed hardship created strength. They believed discipline created security. They believed sacrifice created survival. In many ways, Those beliefs were understandable. For certain periods of history, they even appeared correct. Sparta achieved remarkable military success. Its influence became immense. Its reputation endured for centuries. Yet success is not the same as proof. A society may succeed for many reasons simultaneously. Geography matters. Politics matter. Economics matter. Leadership matters. Luck matters. No single institution can claim full responsibility. Likewise, no institution can avoid responsibility when circumstances change. The agoge created disciplined citizens. Few historians dispute that. The more difficult question concerns cost. What opportunities disappeared? Because children spent so much time preparing for military service. What knowledge remained unexplored? What talents remained undeveloped? What innovations never emerged? These questions cannot be measured easily. History rarely records lost possibilities. We know what happened. We seldom know what might have happened. Yet the possibility remains intriguing. Imagine a child born in Sparta with extraordinary artistic talent. Imagine another with exceptional scientific curiosity. Imagine another gifted in trade, engineering, literature, or philosophy. How would such abilities fit within the agoge? Would they flourish? Would they be encouraged? Or would they receive less attention than qualities connected directly to military service? The answer is not entirely clear, but the question itself reveals something important. Every educational system makes choices. Every educational system emphasizes certain traits over others. Every educational system defines success in particular ways. Sparta defined success very narrowly. That narrow definition helped create military cohesion. It may also have limited other forms of development. The irony becomes increasingly apparent as we examine Sparta's later centuries. The system remained remarkably consistent. The world around it changed dramatically. One adapted, one largely resisted adaptation. History often rewards flexibility. Sparta possessed many virtues. Flexibility was not always among them. As the generations passed, the famous warrior state gradually became less influential, not because its people suddenly became weak, not because its traditions vanished overnight, rather because the challenges facing society evolved. The solutions of one era rarely solve every problem of the next. Children continued entering the agoge. Children continued enduring hardships. Children continued sacrificing comforts. Yet the connection between those sacrifices and Sparta's future became increasingly uncertain. The old confidence faded slowly. The questions grew louder. Was this truly necessary? Did the benefits outweigh the costs? Could a society ask so much from its children forever? Or was there a point at which discipline became rigidity, at which tradition became limitation, at which preparation for the future prevented adaptation to into the future? These questions haunted Sparta's later history, and they remain relevant today because the story of Spartan childhood is not merely about ancient Greece. It is about a timeless dilemma. How much should society demand from its young people? How much hardship builds character, and how much hardship simply becomes suffering? The Spartans believed they knew the answer. History would eventually deliver its own verdict, but that verdict would take centuries to unfold. History would eventually deliver its own verdict, but that verdict would take centuries to unfold. The decline of Sparta was not a dramatic collapse, like the destruction of a city by invading armies. There was no single day when citizens awoke and discovered that Sparta had ceased to matter. The process was slower, far slower. It unfolded across generations. One small change followed another. One challenge led to another. One lost opportunity led to another. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the society that had once dominated much of Greece found itself increasingly overshadowed by larger powers and changing circumstances. For the children still entering the agoge during these later centuries, daily life probably felt remarkably familiar. They woke early, they trained, they obeyed, they endured. The routines established long ago continued operating. Traditions possess tremendous momentum. Once institutions become deeply embedded within society, they can survive for astonishing lengths of time, even when the world around them changes dramatically. This persistence can be a strength. It can also become a weakness. The difference often depends upon circumstances. Sparta had always valued continuity. Its leaders admired stability. Its citizens respected tradition. These qualities helped preserve the agoge through periods of uncertainty. Yet preservation alone could not solve every problem. The Greek world that had given birth to Sparta's famous system no longer existed in the same form. New kingdoms dominated the eastern Mediterranean. Trade routes shifted. Political centers shifted. Cultural influences shifted. The pace of change accelerated. Sparta remained, but it increasingly resembled a survivor from an earlier age, a living reminder of a world that had largely disappeared. Visitors continued arriving. Many came specifically because of Sparta's reputation. They wanted to see the famous warrior society. They wanted to observe the customs they had heard about since childhood. Some arrived expecting to witness the Sparta of legend. What they found often differed from those expectations. The traditions survived. The myths survived. The reality proved more complicated. Several centuries after Sparta's greatest achievements, Greek writers themselves began looking back on the city-state with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. They treated Sparta almost like a historical monument, a place connected to glorious stories from the distant past. This shift is revealing. At its height, Sparta shaped current events. Later, Sparta increasingly became a subject of memory. The distinction matters. A society influences history differently when it becomes famous for what it once was rather than what it currently is. Throughout this period, the agoge continued evolving. No institution remains completely unchanged across centuries. Small adjustments occurred, practical realities, forced adaptations. The exact details remain difficult to reconstruct because historical evidence becomes less abundant. Yet scholars generally agree that later versions of Spartan education differed in certain respects from earlier versions. This is hardly surprising. Every educational system changes eventually. Even the most conservative societies adapt when circumstances demand it. What is fascinating is how strongly Sparta attempted to preserve the image of continuity. The idea mattered almost as much as the reality. Maintaining a connection to the heroic past became increasingly important. For children growing up within the system, the weight of history must have felt enormous. Imagine hearing stories every day about legendary ancestors. Imagine being told repeatedly that your community once stood above all rivals. Imagine living beneath expectations created by generations long gone. The pressure would be substantial. The burden of tradition often grows heavier with time. The more famous the past becomes, the harder it can be to live in the present. Eventually, a new power entered the Greek world, the rise of the Roman Republic, and later, the Roman Empire transformed the Mediterranean. Roman influence expanded steadily. Territories changed hands. Political independence diminished across many regions. Greek communities adapted in different ways. Sparta adapted as well. By this point, the city-state no longer represented a major military power. Its greatest battles belonged to history. Its greatest victories belonged to history. Its greatest fears belonged to history. Yet something remarkable happened. Sparta's reputation endured. Romans admired aspects of Spartan culture. Some Roman writers praised Spartan discipline. Others praised Spartan simplicity. Still others viewed Sparta as a fascinating example of moral rigor. The legend proved surprisingly resilient. In some ways, Sparta became even more famous after losing its power. This often happens in history. Stories outlive institutions. Ideas outlive realities. The image survives long after the original conditions disappear. Visitors during the Roman era sometimes attended Spartan ceremonies almost as tourists. What had once served practical social purposes increasingly acquired symbolic significance. The agoge still existed in some form, but it now operated within a very different world, a world dominated not by rival Greek city-states, but by Rome. The contrast would have astonished earlier generations of Spartans. The boys enduring training centuries later inhabited a society transformed almost beyond recognition. And yet, certain expectations persisted. The commitment to discipline persisted. The admiration of endurance persisted. The celebration of self-control persisted. The values survived, even when the circumstances that created them had vanished. This persistence raises an important question. What exactly was the agoge trying to accomplish? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. It aimed to create soldiers, yet that explanation feels incomplete. After all, the system survived long after Sparta ceased dominating battlefields. Perhaps the agoge also served another purpose. Perhaps it helped define identity. Perhaps it helped citizens understand who they were. Perhaps it provided continuity in a changing world. Educational systems rarely transmit only practical skills. They also transmit values, memories, stories, beliefs. The agoge certainly did all of those things. Even so, historians continue debating its overall impact. Some scholars emphasize its successes. The system undeniably produced disciplined citizens. It undeniably created strong social cohesion. It undeniably contributed to Sparta's military reputation. These achievements were real. Others focus on the costs, the suppression of individuality, the emphasis upon conformity, the harsh treatment of children, the limited opportunities for intellectual and artistic development. These concerns are equally real. The difficulty lies in balancing them. History rarely provides simple verdicts. Most institutions produce both benefits and costs. Sparta's educational system was no exception. Yet, when examining childhood specifically, the moral questions become harder to ignore. The boys entering the agoge did not choose the system. The adults chose it. The boys inherited it. A 7-year-old could not evaluate competing educational philosophies. A 7-year-old could not debate political theory. A 7-year-old simply followed the path established by society. This reality matters because whenever societies impose sacrifices upon children, a responsibility emerges. The sacrifices must serve a meaningful purpose, and they must justify their costs. Whether Sparta succeeded in meeting that standard remains a matter of debate. The ancient Spartans believed the answer was yes. Many outsiders believed the answer was yes. Many others believed the answer was no. The disagreement has persisted for more than 2,000 years, and perhaps that persistence tells us something important. Perhaps the disturbing truth about Spartan childhood is not merely that it was harsh. Many societies throughout history have imposed hardships upon children. The deeper truth may be that Sparta forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about education itself. What should childhood be for? Preparation, protection, freedom, discipline. How much should a child sacrifice for society? How much should society sacrifice for a child? The Spartans answered these questions in one of the most extreme ways history has ever recorded. Their answers created legends. Their answers created achievements. Their answers created suffering. And their answers continue provoking debate long after the city-state itself faded into history. As the centuries passed and the old world disappeared, the memory of Spartan childhood survived, not because everyone agreed with it, but because almost nobody could ignore it. And that memory would eventually become even more powerful than Sparta itself. And that memory would eventually become even more powerful than Sparta itself. Long after Sparta ceased to dominate battlefields, long after its armies stopped shaping the political future of Greece, and long after the children who endured the agoge had vanished into history, the image of Sparta continued traveling through time. This is perhaps one of the strangest aspects of the entire story. Many powerful civilizations disappear and are largely forgotten. Many military victories fade from memory. Many institutions leave only faint traces behind. Sparta did something different. Sparta became an idea, and ideas often survive much longer than nations. Centuries after the last generation of classical Spartans had passed away, writers continued discussing Spartan customs. Philosophers continued debating Spartan values. Political thinkers continued examining Spartan laws. Military leaders continued studying Spartan discipline. The actual city became less important than the stories surrounding it. The legend grew. Sometimes it grew larger than reality. This process began surprisingly early, even among the ancient Greeks themselves. Sparta often existed in two forms. There was the real Sparta, and there was the imagined Sparta. The real Sparta contained ordinary people, ordinary fears, ordinary mistakes, ordinary contradictions. The imagined Sparta contained perfect discipline, perfect courage, perfect unity, perfect self-control. Human beings frequently prefer legends to complexities. Legends are easier to understand. Legends fit neatly into stories. Reality rarely does. The distinction matters enormously when discussing Spartan childhood. Many of the stories repeated through history came from observers who admired Sparta. Others came from critics who disliked Sparta. Both groups sometimes exaggerated. Both groups sometimes simplified. As a result, historians today face a difficult challenge. They must separate myth from reality. The task is not always easy. Ancient evidence remains incomplete. Many records have been lost. Many details remain uncertain. Some famous stories may contain truth. Others may contain embellishment. Still others may be largely symbolic. The further we move from Sparta's own time, the more complicated the picture becomes. Imagine trying to reconstruct the daily life of an ordinary 12-year-old Spartan boy. What did he think about while falling asleep? What frightened him? What made him laugh? which friendships mattered most, which dreams occupied his imagination. History rarely answers such questions. The surviving sources generally focus on institutions. They focus on laws. They focus on military practices. They focus on ideals. The emotional lives of children rarely received attention. This absence creates one of the greatest challenges facing modern historians. Children experience the agoge directly, yet their voices are almost entirely missing. Adults described the system. Adults defended the system. Adults criticized the system. The children themselves remain largely silent. That silence forces historians to proceed carefully. It is easy to assume. It is easy to project modern emotions onto ancient people. It is also easy to imagine that ancient children felt nothing at all. Both extremes are misleading. The truth, almost certainly, lies somewhere in between. A Spartan boy was still a child. He still experienced joy. He still experienced fear. He still experienced curiosity. He still experienced disappointment. The agoge may have shaped how those emotions were expressed. It could not eliminate them. Human nature does not disappear so easily. During the modern era, Sparta attracted renewed attention. Writers, educators, political theorists, and military reformers frequently looked backward toward ancient examples. Some admired Spartan discipline. Some admired Spartan simplicity. Others viewed Sparta as a warning rather than a model. The debates became increasingly intense. In certain periods, people praised Sparta's ability to create social cohesion. In other periods, people condemned Sparta's harsh treatment of children. The same evidence produced dramatically different conclusions. This disagreement continues today. Part of the reason lies in changing attitudes toward childhood. Ancient societies generally viewed childhood differently than modern societies. Many ancient cultures expected children to contribute to family and community responsibilities at relatively young ages. Physical punishment appeared more commonly. Educational opportunities differed. Life expectancy differed. The entire social environment differed. Modern people often place greater emphasis on emotional development, personal choice, creativity, and psychological well-being. These priorities influence how modern audiences interpret Spartan customs. Practices once praised as character building may now appear cruel. Practices once viewed as necessary may now appear unnecessary. The shift reflects changing values, and changing values influence historical judgment. Yet even after accounting for these differences, many historians conclude that Spartan childhood was unusually demanding by ancient standards. That distinction is important. Sparta was not simply different from modern societies. It was often different from neighboring societies of its own era. Most Greek city-states did not remove boys from family life in the same manner. Most Greek city-states did not organize childhood so completely around military preparation. Most Greek city-states did not impose the same level of communal discipline. Sparta occupied an extreme position even within its own historical context. This reality helps explain why ancient observers found it so fascinating. They recognized its uniqueness. They debated its merits. They questioned its costs. Some admired it deeply. Others found it disturbing. The debate began during antiquity and has never truly ended. One particularly revealing aspect of modern scholarship involves the concept of trade-offs. Historians increasingly emphasize that societies often gain certain advantages by sacrificing other possibilities. Sparta illustrates this principle clearly. The agoge helped create strong group loyalty. It may also have limited individual freedom. The agoge encouraged resilience. It may also have normalized hardship. The agoge fostered discipline. It may also have discouraged independent thinking. These possibilities are not mutually exclusive. A system can produce benefits and costs simultaneously. Indeed, most systems do. The challenge lies in determining whether the benefits justified the sacrifices. Reasonable people continue reaching different conclusions. Some point toward Sparta's military achievements. Others point toward its eventual decline. Some emphasize social cohesion. Others emphasize human suffering. The evidence supports elements of each perspective. Perhaps the most important lesson is that no educational system operates in isolation. Education reflects values. Values reflect priorities. Priorities reflect beliefs about what kind of society people wish to create. Sparta valued collective strength above almost everything else. Its childhood system reflected that choice. The results became famous. The consequences became famous as well. As historians study the surviving evidence, they often discover that Sparta reveals as much about human societies generally as it does about Sparta specifically. Many cultures ask children to sacrifice for future goals. Many cultures justify present hardships by appealing to future benefits. Many cultures claim their methods are necessary for survival. Sparta simply pushed these ideas further than most. That is why its story remains relevant. The questions it raises have never disappeared. How much discipline is too much? How much freedom is too little? How should societies balance individual well-being against collective needs? What responsibilities do adults owe children? And what responsibilities do children owe society? Ancient Sparta offered one set of answers. History has spent more than 2,000 years debating whether those answers were wise. The debate continues because the questions themselves remain unresolved. And as we move closer to the final chapters of this story, another fascinating issue awaits us. Not what Sparta actually was, but what people today think Sparta was. Because in many ways, the modern image of Spartan childhood has become almost as complicated as the historical reality itself, because in many ways, the modern image of Spartan childhood has become almost as complicated as the historical reality itself. When most people hear the word Sparta today, a very specific image immediately appears in their minds. They picture fearless warriors. They picture endless military drills. They picture boys transformed into soldiers through relentless hardship. They picture a society composed entirely of strength, discipline, and sacrifice. The image feels familiar. It feels clear. It feels simple. The problem is that history is rarely simple, and Sparta may be one of the clearest examples. Over the centuries, storytellers, artists, writers, filmmakers, politicians, and military thinkers have all reshaped the image of Sparta according to their own needs. Each generation inherited the legend. Each generation modified it. Each generation emphasized different details. The result is a modern Sparta that often looks very different from the historical Sparta. Some versions exaggerate the heroism. Others exaggerate the brutality. Both approaches can obscure reality. The actual story is more complicated and in many ways more interesting. One of the biggest misconceptions involves the belief that every Spartan citizen lived as a full-time warrior from birth until death. The reality was far more nuanced. Spartans certainly trained for warfare. Military service certainly played a central role in society. Yet Sparta also contained families, farmers, religious festivals, political institutions, friendships, marriages, daily routines. Children still played games. People still laughed. People still worried about ordinary problems. Human life continued beneath the famous military reputation. This fact matters because it reminds us that Spartan children were not mythical characters. They were real human beings. They felt hunger. They felt exhaustion. They felt excitement. They felt fear. They lived complicated lives within a complicated society. Another common misconception involves the agoge itself. Popular portrayals sometimes suggest that Spartan childhood consisted entirely of physical suffering. Certainly, hardship played an important role. Ancient sources leave little doubt about that. But the agoge also served educational, social, and cultural functions. It taught values. It taught identity. It taught belonging. It taught children how to operate within Spartan society. Reducing the system to endless punishment oversimplifies the historical reality. At the same time, romanticizing the system creates a different problem. Some modern admirers portray Spartan childhood as a perfect method of creating strength and character. They focus exclusively on discipline and resilience. They overlook the costs. They overlook the emotional burden. They overlook the lack of personal freedom. They overlook the fact that children had little choice in the matter. History becomes distorted when only one side of the story receives attention. The truth usually exists somewhere between celebration and condemnation. Modern historians increasingly approach Sparta with caution. Earlier generations sometimes accepted ancient stories at face value. Today's scholars examine those stories more carefully. Who wrote them? Why were they written? How reliable were the authors? What biases may have influenced their descriptions? These questions matter enormously. Much of what we know about Sparta comes from outsiders. Many ancient writers admired Sparta. Others disliked it. Neither group was completely neutral. As a result, reconstructing reality requires careful analysis. Historians compare sources. They examine archaeological evidence. They evaluate contradictions. They search for patterns. The process is slow. The conclusions often remain tentative. Yet a clearer picture has gradually emerged. Most scholars now agree that Spartan childhood really was unusually demanding. The emphasis on discipline was real. The communal upbringing was real. The separation from family life was real. The preparation for military service was real. At the same time, some of the most extreme stories may have been exaggerated over centuries of retelling. Reality and legend became intertwined. Separating them remains an ongoing challenge. Perhaps the most important conclusion reached by modern historians concerns the purpose of the system. The agoge was not designed primarily to benefit individual children. It was designed to benefit Sparta. That distinction sits at the heart of the entire story. Modern educational systems often claim that childhood should help individuals achieve personal fulfillment. Sparta prioritized a different goal. Sparta asked what kind of citizens the state required. Then it attempted to create those citizens. Everything else became secondary. The needs of the collective came first. The needs of the individual came second. Understanding this difference helps explain why Spartan childhood continues provoking such strong reactions. People are not merely debating ancient history. They are debating values. What matters most? Personal freedom, collective security, individual development, social unity. Different societies answer differently. Sparta answered with unusual clarity. Its answer produced one of the most famous childhood systems in history. Yet history's final judgment remains complicated. Sparta achieved remarkable military success. It maintained social cohesion for centuries. Its reputation became legendary. These accomplishments cannot be dismissed. At the same time, Sparta eventually declined. Its population shrank. Its influence faded. Its institutions struggled to adapt to changing circumstances. The educational system survived longer than the power it was meant to protect. This outcome raises difficult questions. If a society asks extraordinary sacrifices from its children, What level of success justifies those sacrifices? How should success even be measured? Military victories, political stability, cultural achievements, human happiness. Different answers produce different conclusions. That is why debates about Sparta continue after more than 2,000 years. And perhaps that is the most disturbing truth of all. The disturbing truth is not simply that Spartan childhood was harsh. Many societies throughout history have been harsh. The disturbing truth is that intelligent people can look at the same evidence and reach very different conclusions about whether the system was admirable or tragic. Some see discipline, others see deprivation. Some see resilience, others see suffering. Some see strength, others see lost childhoods. The evidence contains elements of all these interpretations. The children themselves never had the opportunity to participate in that debate. They simply lived it. They woke before sunrise. They followed the rules. They endured the expectations placed upon them. They grew into adults, shaped by decisions made long before they were born. Most never became famous. Most never appeared in historical records. Most vanished into the past. Yet together, they formed the foundation of one of history's most remarkable societies, a society whose memory outlived its power, a society whose childhood system still sparks arguments thousands of years later. And as night settles over ancient Sparta, one final time, the training grounds grow quiet. The voices of children fade into the darkness. The generations pass. The city changes. The world changes. Empires rise. Empires fall. But the questions remain. Questions about childhood. Questions about sacrifice. Questions about what societies owe their young. Questions that began in Sparta, but continue far beyond it. The boys who once entered the agoge at 7 years old are gone. Their city is gone. Their world is gone. Yet their story remains, not because it offers easy answers, but because it forces us to ask difficult questions. And perhaps that is why, after more than 2 millennia, we are still talking about them tonight. If you want to continue the journey, the next video is waiting.